Noah's phone buzzed before sunrise, cutting through the quiet of his small apartment. He reached for it grudgingly, expecting the usual mix of notifications. Instead, a single text glared at him, cold and sharp. "Stay away this Christmas. The family's done with you." He froze, staring at the words as if they had physically hit him. The screen glowed like an accusation, and in that moment the apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Noah had always known his family could be harsh, but he never imagined it would come like this, so direct, so final. There was no explanation, no "let's talk," no reasoning. Just a statement that left him dangling on the edge of shock and disbelief. Memories rushed at him like waves. Every sacrifice, every effort to be seen and valued, seemed to mock him now. He remembered the times he stayed late to help with the family business, while his siblings went off to parties, the countless hours he spent fixing things around the house or just being there when everyone else walked away. He had given up chances to pursue his own dreams, thinking that family came first, that loyalty would earn their love. And yet, here he was, cast aside with a few cold words. Noah pressed the phone against his chest, feeling the weight of rejection settle deep inside him. It wasn't just the text, it was everything it represented. The years of feeling overlooked, unheard, and unappreciated had built up into a quiet resentment that now stirred to life. For the first time, the anger wasn't hidden behind polite smiles or excuses. It was raw, palpable, and it demanded attention. You wanted to scream, to ask why, but no voice came. The silence was deafening. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, still half asleep under the dim morning light. People bustled along the streets below, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. Noah envied them, their freedom to live without this weight. But he couldn't escape what he felt. Not yet. The betrayal was too fresh, too sharp. Every memory of being overlooked played in his mind like a cruel montage. He thought of last Christmas, the shouting, the blaming, the accusations flying across the table while his father's eyes pierced him with judgment. His mother had stayed silent. His siblings had watched. The silence had been louder than any words, a punishment in itself. Noah's chest tightened as he remembered the final argument. He had defended himself, explained his side, but it didn't matter. The family had already made up their minds, and he was left standing alone in the center of a room full of people who were supposed to love him. The text now was just a continuation of that long unspoken sentence. You are not wanted. You are not enough. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone as if it could somehow answer the questions he had. But no answer came. Only the cold truth of rejection. He felt the familiar sting of tears, but he refused them. Not now. Anger was more useful. Anger could be channeled. It could push him forward, make him think, make him plan. The betrayal had sparked something he had never allowed himself to feel fully: revenge. Not a violent, chaotic revenge, but deliberate, quiet one, calculated and precise. For years, he had been the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who always bent to the family's will. But this time, he realized he didn't have to. The text had given him permission in a way to step back and rethink everything. They wanted him gone. Fine. He could disappear, but on his own terms. He could leave without begging for forgiveness or approval. He could make them realize what it felt like to be without him. His mind raced as he considered the possibilities. He could ignore the family completely, stay away, and let them feel the emptiness his absence would create. Or he could respond, subtly, in ways that would make them question their decision, feel the same sting of loss he felt. Every thought seemed both thrilling and terrifying. The excitement of planning anything that would assert his value, mingled with the fear of sinking into bitterness he might never escape. Noah's gaze fell on the calendar, marked with all the family events he had attended over the years. Each square reminded him of another time he had sacrificed his own happiness, trying to maintain harmony that was always one-sided. He realized how much of himself he had given away, only to be told he wasn't enough. That realization brought a strange clarity. He didn't need them. They had made their choice. The choice was theirs, not his. And in that choice lay a power he hadn't acknowledged before, the power to reclaim his life, his time, his dignity. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Noah felt a shift within himself. The betrayal, raw and painful as it was, had ignited something that fear or guilt never could. It was a call to action, a turning point. He could let it break him, or he could use it to reshape his life. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but now it had focus. It was no longer just emotion. It was a tool, a driving force. For the first time in a long while, Noah allowed himself to imagine life on the other side of the betrayal. He pictured the freedom of not being tied to a family that judged and dismissed him, the relief of no longer chasing approval that would never come. But with that freedom came the temptation of revenge, the quiet kind, that wouldn't make headlines, but would sting more deeply. He thought about how he could step away and let their world wobble without him, how his absence could speak louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. He sat back, letting the phone rest on his lap. The words on the screen no longer felt like a death sentence. They were a challenge. And Noah, for the first time, felt ready to meet it. The betrayal had hurt him. Yes, but it had also opened a door. A door to choice, to self-discovery, to a plan that could shift the balance. He didn't need to reply, didn't need to justify himself. Silence could be his answer. Presence could be his revenge. And with that realization, a slow, deliberate smile crept across his face. He wasn't just the victim anymore. He was someone who had been wronged, and now, finally, he had the chance to decide what that would mean. Not in anger, not in haste, but in control. The text had lit the spark. The next steps would be his. To take. Noah rose, grabbed a notebook from the shelf, and opened it to a blank page. He began to write not a letter, not a confrontation, not a plea. He began to write a map of possibilities, a plan for how he would reclaim his power without losing himself. The words flowed fast, each one a small assertion of self-worth. This betrayal, he realized, wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could finally put himself first without guilt or fear. The room was quiet. Again, except for the scratching of the pen. Outside, the city woke up, indifferent to the drama unfolding in a small apartment. But Noah didn't care. The betrayal had been brutal, but it had also been clarifying. And as he wrote, a single thought anchored him. He would not vanish as a victim. He would vanish as someone who chose himself. And in that choice, he would find the power and peace he had always been denied. The first part of his journey was complete. The seed of revenge, tempered with purpose, was planted. And for the first time in years, Noah felt something he had never truly felt before: control. Noah sat in his apartment for hours, staring at the blank screen of his phone. The text from his father had ignited something inside him. A storm of emotions he had tried to suppress for years. Anger, hurt, betrayal, they churned together, making it hard to think clearly, but also sharpening his mind in a strange way. He knew what he couldn't do: react impulsively, send a bitter message, or storm into the house expecting apologies. That would make him the same as them. the one begging for attention, the one desperate for validation. He didn't want that anymore. He wanted control, and control required patience. The first step was understanding the emotions swirling within him. He replayed memories, not just the pain, but the moments he had given everything and received nothing. He remembered helping his father move boxes in the sweltering summer heat, only to be ignored when he asked for advice about his own life. He remembered the nights he stayed awake with his sick mother, while his siblings went to parties or vacations. Every sacrifice had been invisible, every effort unappreciated. And now, the text confirmed what he had suspected for years. They didn't value him. They had written him out of the story. Yet anger alone wasn't enough. Noah realized that revenge required more than emotion, it required strategy. He needed to think carefully about his next moves. He didn't want to lash out and ruin what little connection remained. But he also didn't want to disappear quietly and let them forget him. He needed to make them feel, in a subtle way, the absence of someone they had dismissed. The idea of a quiet, calculated absence appealed to him. No confrontation, no shouting, just a vacuum where his presence used to be. A void that would speak louder than any words. Even as he planned, doubt crept in. Was he becoming someone he didn't want to be? The thought of revenge thrilled him, but it also scared him. He was afraid that in focusing too much on their pain, he would lose himself in the process. For days he walked around his apartment, sleepless, restless, imagining the upcoming holiday. He pictured his father sitting at the dinner table, trying to appear cheerful, forcing conversations, pretending everything was fine while the tension simmered under the surface. He imagined his siblings glancing at the empty chair, wondering why he hadn't shown up, feeling a small, gnawing unease that no amount of holiday decorations could mask. Noah began to map out scenarios. He thought about subtle ways to make his absence noticeable. He could make sure they knew he had been invited, that the choice to stay away was theirs to regret. He could let silence speak for him. Perhaps a cryptic message here or there, not accusing, not confrontational, just enough to hint that he was aware of their intentions. Every day he ran through possibilities in his head, weighing the risks, imagining the outcomes. He knew one wrong move could backfire, turning his quiet assertion into a self-inflicted wound. Yet the deeper he planned, the more he struggled internally. Revenge sounded satisfying in theory, but the reality was complicated. He realized that punishing them wouldn't erase the pain they caused. It would only mirror it. He wrestled with the moral side of his thoughts. Could he exact revenge and still feel good about himself? Or would it taint his conscience permanently? These questions kept him awake at night, pacing the apartment, hands trembling, heart racing. He realized that the path to revenge was also a test of character. Would he let bitterness consume him? Or could he channel it into something constructive? Noah also had to confront the reality of his feelings toward his family. Despite the betrayal, he still loved them in his own way. He remembered his mother's quiet smile, his father's rare moments of pride, his sister's laughter when they were children. That love complicated everything. He wanted to hurt them, yes, but he didn't want to destroy what remained of his bond completely. He realized revenge could be executed in a way that left doors open, that let them reflect on their mistakes without permanently burning bridges. It required patience, subtlety, and above all, emotional control. As Christmas approached, the tension inside him grew. He could feel it in every movement, how he reached for his coffee, how he walked the streets, how he avoided looking at the family's social media posts. Every mention of the holiday was a reminder of the absence he had been forced into, and every image of celebrations he wasn't invited to tighten the knot in his chest. Yet the plan began to crystallize. He wouldn't confront them directly. He wouldn't accuse them. He would step back, observe, and let their assumptions about his absence speak for themselves. That strategy wasn't enough. Noah had to confront his emotional state, which was raw and unpredictable. He spent hours writing in a journal, recording every thought, every memory, every spark of anger. The act of writing became a tool for clarity, a way to channel his emotions. Constructively, he realized that planning revenge wasn't just about punishing them. It was about reclaiming his power. Every line he wrote, every idea he plotted, reminded him that he had agency, that he didn't need their approval to define himself. Even so, fear lingered. What if his absence hurt more than intended? What if his plan backfired, and they misunderstood his silence as guilt, shame, or weakness? These thoughts gnawed at him, threatening to paralyze him. But he refused to succumb. He reminded himself that inaction had already cost him years of peace. Now was the time to assert himself, even if it was uncomfortable. He decided that he would not allow fear to dictate his actions. The only way to regain control was to act deliberately, thoughtfully, and without emotion clouding his judgment. The conflict within Noah became almost physical. He would sit for hours, planning and pausing, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his chest, the restless energy in his legs. His mind was a storm, torn between love and resentment, hope and bitterness, morality and vengeance. Every day was a test, a struggle to balance his desire for justice with the need to remain true to himself. He began to see the duality of revenge. It was both seductive and dangerous. It promised satisfaction, yet threatened to consume him. If he let it. Noah also began to notice the small ways the family had already been affected by the dynamics. Conversations he overheard in the neighborhood, subtle social media posts, and the occasional curious call all hinted at their awareness of the tension. Each sign confirmed that his absence would not go unnoticed. This realization strengthened his resolve. The plan was no longer just an emotional reaction. It was a carefully considered move designed to assert his value without confrontation. He spent nights imagining the Christmas table, empty where he would have sat, the subtle glances exchanged, the uneasy laughter that might ripple through the room. He imagined the questions they would ask themselves. Why didn't he come? Did we go too far? Did we push him away? The thought of them questioning themselves, reflecting on their own behavior, was strangely satisfying. Not cruelly so, but as a validation of his presence, of his worth, of the fact that they could not erase him so easily. In those quiet hours, Noah began to understand that revenge, in this form, wasn't about hatred. It was about reclaiming dignity. He didn't need to destroy them. He didn't need to make them suffer in ways that would make him bitter forever. He just needed to assert his absence in a way that reminded them of what they had lost. And in doing so, remind himself of what he had been denying himself all these years. By the time the week before Christmas arrived, Noah's internal conflict had solidified into a plan. He would stay away, let silence speak, and let the absence he had been forced into become a tool of reflection for the family. He would not engage in angry exchanges or petty confrontations. He would not compromise his principles. He would act with purpose, patience, and clarity, letting the emotional weight of the past years manifest through his deliberate withdrawal. And yet, as he closed his journal each night and looked at the phone glowing softly on the bedside table, he felt the tension that came with anticipation. The struggle was not over. The conflict was still alive, simmering just beneath the surface. The real test was approaching, the moment when his absence would collide with reality, and the family would have to face the consequences of their own actions. Noah understood that this was the moment that would define him, The moment when he would either be consumed by anger or emerge empowered, having navigated the treacherous path between revenge and self-respect. The night before Christmas, Noah sat by the window, watching the snow fall thick and silent over the city. Each flake seemed to mirror his own quiet tension, soft, calm, but heavy with meaning. The streets below were empty, lit only by the yellow glow of street lamps reflecting on the icy pavement. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, just as he had been holding his own for days. His phone lay beside him, silent now, but the memory of his father's cold text burned in his mind. "Stay away this Christmas. The family's done with you." Those words had set everything in motion, and now the moment of truth was at hand. Noah had spent a week planning his absence, carefully considering how to execute his subtle form of revenge. He hadn't replied, hadn't sent angry messages, hadn't pleaded. Instead, he had let the silence grow, letting the idea of him not coming become real to his family. He imagined them preparing for Christmas, arranging chairs, planning conversations, expecting him to walk through the door, and then realizing he wouldn't. That absence was his statement, his answer, his assertion of control. Yet as the day drew closer, doubt began to creep in. He thought about his mother's gentle smile, the warmth she radiated even when the family was fractured. He thought about his sister, who had laughed at jokes he hadn't been part of, and confided in him when no one else listened. Could his absence hurt them more than it satisfied him? Could his carefully plotted plan backfire, leaving him alone and bitter instead of empowered? He could almost hear their voices, wondering why he wasn't there, imagining the subtle pangs of guilt or confusion rippling through the room. The idea thrilled and terrified him at once. Noah's hand hovered over his phone as it vibrated. A message. He froze. It was his mother. "Are you coming? You haven't said anything." The words were simple, almost innocent, but they pierced through the armor he had built around himself. His chest tightened. He wanted to explain, to say the truth, that he had been pushed away, rejected, dismissed, that he had been told not to come. But he also wanted them to feel the absence he had felt for years, the loneliness, the disappointment, the sense of being unneeded. He realized that the power of silence was greater than any words he could send. Then came another message from his sister. "Noah, Dad said you didn't want to come. Is that true?" That was it. The story was being rewritten. Not we told him to stay away, but he abandoned us. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The betrayal had been doubled, the injustice amplified. He had been wronged, and now they were turning it against him, spinning the narrative so that he appeared guilty, ungrateful, or weak. The fire inside him flared. This wasn't just about absence anymore. It was about truth. Noah realized that this was the critical moment. The choice lay before him like a forked path in a dark forest. One path led to anger, confrontation, and revenge that could leave lasting damage. The other led to silence, truth, and a quiet assertion of his dignity. He could expose the lies, send scathing messages, demand acknowledgement. But at what cost? Would that restore the bond he wanted? Or simply deepen the wounds? The ethical side of him wrestled with the strategic side. The tension was almost unbearable, the internal conflict rising like a tide he couldn't stop. He remembered the nights he had stayed awake, replaying memories, writing in his journal, mapping possibilities. Every scenario had led him to this moment. He could stay silent and let their assumptions unravel, or he could act to correct the narrative, risking the emotional fallout. The clock ticked loudly, the snow continued to fall, and the city remained oblivious to the storm in his small apartment. Noah's heart pounded, adrenaline surging as he realized that this was the climax not of an external confrontation, but of an internal reckoning. Finally, he typed a single line. "Ask Dad what he sent me. Then decide for yourselves." He hesitated, fingers hovering over the send button. This was not an attack. It was not aggression. It was the truth, delivered in a measured, almost understated way. A truth that allowed his family to confront their own actions, to reflect on the messages and assumptions they had created. It was a seed of accountability, a spark of clarity, placed carefully in their hands. He pressed send. Almost immediately, the phone buzzed with calls. His mother first, then his sister, then distant relatives. He didn't answer. He let them ring, letting the moment linger, letting them wonder, letting the tension he had carried for so long mirror itself back onto them. He felt the power of the choice he had made. The act of sending that one measured text had shifted the balance, placing the responsibility on them to face the truth. For the first time, he wasn't reacting emotionally, he was directing the narrative. Sitting back in his chair, Noah felt a strange combination of relief and emptiness. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a hollow ache in its place. He realized that revenge, even subtle and calculated, didn't bring satisfaction in the way movies or stories promised. It wasn't about winning or hurting the other person. It was about reclaiming agency, asserting self-respect, and refusing to be cast aside without acknowledgement. He had created a space where he could breathe, a buffer between himself and the toxic dynamics that had dominated his life. As the night deepened and the calls slowed, Noah reflected on the broader lesson. He hadn't humiliated them. He hadn't destroyed relationships permanently, and he hadn't burned bridges out of spite. He had simply chosen himself. The realization was powerful. Revenge, he saw now, was never about them. It was about him, about how he responded to betrayal, about the boundaries he set and the values he upheld. The narrative had shifted not through aggression, but through deliberate, mindful action. By midnight, Noah felt a clarity he had never experienced before. He looked out at the city blanketed in white, the quiet streets reflecting the stillness inside him. The storm of emotions that had raged for a week had calmed, replaced by a sober sense of control. He wasn't triumphant in a traditional sense. There was no joy in seeing others suffer. There was only the sober satisfaction of having acted on his terms, having preserved his dignity, and having planted the seeds of reflection in the people who had wronged him. He realized that this moment was also a turning point. He could choose to let the events define him, dragging him into bitterness, resentment, and regret, or he could allow them to serve as a lesson in self-worth, resilience, and careful planning. He understood that revenge was not the destination. It was a tool, a means of asserting boundaries and reclaiming power. The true climax was internal, the battle within himself, and he had emerged with control intact. As the first light of Christmas morning filtered through the blinds, Noah felt the weight of years lift slightly from his shoulders. He had made his choice, faced the tension, and acted decisively. He knew there would be conversations, perhaps confrontations, in the days ahead. But he no longer felt like a victim, no longer felt the gnawing need to seek validation from those who had rejected him. For the first time in years, he was free to define his own narrative, to step into the future on his own terms. He picked up the journal he had used to map his thoughts and opened it again. He wrote a single line. "I am not defined by their perception. I define myself." The act was symbolic, a reminder that the true power was not in their regret or reflection, but in his ability to act consciously, to choose self-respect over bitterness. The climax had not been dramatic in the conventional sense. There were no raised voices, no public revelations. But in its subtlety, it carried a deeper weight, a quiet reckoning that would resonate far beyond this Christmas night. Noah finally put the journal down, stretched, and walked to the window. The snow continued to fall, the streets remained silent, and the world seemed to hold its breath with him. He understood that life was a series of choices, and the most powerful choice he could make was to act deliberately, to assert his own worth, and to let others face the consequences of their actions in their own time. The climax of his story was complete, not through vengeance, but through truth, self-respect, and the courage to step away without regret.